Welcome back, you glorious Godot people. In this video, we're going to go a step further. We've looked at how to display text to ourselves as programmers, how to put it in the output, how to display it to the player. Now let's talk about how to get text from the player. Right? This is going to be a key component not just in our game, but it's also a foundational principle in a lot of games that we might make in the future. So what do we need to do? Well, to get text, we have to have a place for the player to type. There's probably going to be a node or two we can use. We're going to have to get the words that the player types into the actual script, right? So I'm going to have to put a word somewhere, and then the script has to take those words and then do something with it. What's it have to do? It's going to respond somehow. All right, we're going to have a little exercise to get it to respond, and then as we go on in the course, we'll start making our stories and displaying them. So with that said, let's get into Godot. Hello, Godot. And let's take a look at what we need to do. Well, there's going to be a new type of node we're going to put in. So I'm going to click on LineEdit and Control A, or if you don't want to do Control A, press the little button, the little plus sign. And under Control, there's a couple we could use. There's a LineEdit and a TextEdit. Now, the difference between them is, do you want the player to be able to press Return to go to a next line, or Return to enter the text? A LineEdit allows a player to enter a single line of text. For example, if you want to put in a name or a single word. A text edit is where you want people to fill out a lot of information. So if you're making a role-playing game and you want the player to be able to write their own journals, you would use a text edit. I don't want to do that. I want a line edit. So here is my line edit node. And it's very small and in the corner. For the moment, I'm just going to drag it over here. You'll see in a control node, by the way, when you move things, you see little measurements. And let's just make it a little bit bigger and see what it looks like. And press play. And here is a box that the player can type in. Hello. Doesn't do anything, but there it is. Now, this isn't a great piece of layout, is it? What I could do is I could extend it like, oops, you see the problem already. I can extend it like this and put it where I want. But let's try and organize this a little bit better. I'm going to add a new node. This time I'll press the plus button. And I'm looking for a box container. So if I type in box, you'll see there's a couple here. There's an HBox container and a VBox container. What do they do? Well, the description isn't showing in this build of Godot. That's a little annoying. You can see from the icon, the HBox container contains things into columns. That's the word I'm looking for. So every node beneath it will be automatically arranged into columns. This one will do rows. Let's see what that looks like. If I click on VBox container, and I'm going to put LineEdit within the VBox container, and I'm going to put the display text within the VBox container. Now let's make the VBox container, it's kind of a mouthful to say, is it? The vertical box, let's make the containy thing full rectangle. And when I click on the LineEdit, you'll see the LineEdit is actually above the display. It's a little hard to see unless I zoom right in. And what I can do is I can drag the display text above it, and it's the other way around. So the way that containers and organizers of any kind work in Godot is the order in which you put them in the scene tree is the order they'll be organized. A couple of things you'll notice. One, everything's at the top here. And the more text we have, the more this will move. Don't really want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the options, the inspector, and let's change the alignment from begin to end. Now this is going to put the LineEdit always at the very bottom. A little hard to see there, so let's put a margin on it. So with VBox container still selected, I'm going to hit margin and just going to repeat that 24 pixels thing. All measurements, by the way, are in pixels. So 24 from the top, 24 from the bottom, minus 24 from the right, and minus 24 from the bottom. One more thing I want to do is I want to change the font here. I want to match the same font. So under custom fonts, I'm just going to give it a new dynamic font. Click on the dynamic font, and then I can go into my graphics folder and drag it over here. Now what I could do is I could save this font, and if I was using it several times, I would click this little down arrow, do save, and I could just load that font in. But we've only got a few elements in this game, so let's keep it nice and simple. All right, now we've got something that looks almost ready, but the display text is going to hover down the bottom. So what I want to do here is give it a minimum size. So with display text selected, let's go over to rect. I've got the size it's at. At the moment, it's 976 pixels on the x-axis and 63 on the y. Let's give it a bigger minimum size. I'm going to say the y has to be at least 400 pixels. Look at that. Now when I press play, it doesn't work. Why? Because my script is pointing to something. Okay, let's fix that real quick. If you look here, this get node, the $, is pointing to a direct child called display text. So we are at LineEdit, that's where our script is, and it's looking for a direct child. Well, if I minimize that, you can see there isn't one. So what I need to do is update this. So the path is important. And there's a couple of ways I could do this. I could type in display text and let it autocomplete. I could drag it in. And then if I wanted to, I could get rid of these quotes. They'll both work just fine. So now when I press play, we have a text that isn't all the way down the bottom. It's not quite at the top. That's not quite there, but it's looking better. And I can type in here. But nothing is happening. Okay, so what I want to do is to make this connect somehow to the script. Now the way I'm going to do that is by clicking on LineEdit, and I'm going to rename LineEdit. Let's give it a better name. Let's say this is player text, the text the player enters. And with it selected, on the right-hand side, you see this tab that says Inspector. There's another one that says Node. If I click on it, I have something called Signals. We also have something called Groups, which are also very cool, but we'll be looking at them later. For now, let's concentrate on Signals. And I have all these little options here. And before we go into those, let's talk about what signals in Godot are, because they're a really key idea. Each of the nodes in Godot can do something, right? So if we have a LineEdit node, it can take text from the player. And over here, we have a label node. And it can display text. So we want a way of plugging them in. Now, we could do this in lots of little scripts that all tell each other, I've changed your value, I've changed your function, and all the rest of it. But this can get very messy very quickly. You want to minimize the amount of times a node or a different script can change values in another script. There are times where it might be unavoidable, but for the vast majority of the time, we don't want to do that. The one exception is a parent node. So in this case, we have our root node, our control node, which has the LineEdit script, which can directly change the values of its children. Okay, we're going to allow that. Godot has nothing inside it by default that will stop the LineEdit node from changing the root and from changing the label, and the label from changing the LineEdit, the label from changing the root, and as add more nodes, it becomes very difficult for us as human beings, as coders, to track down where problems are occurring, because so many values, so many variables and functions, everything is being triggered from everywhere else. So instead, we're going to use something called a signal. Imagine that our label node has a handy mobile phone or pager, and our LineEdit node has another one. When a certain thing happens, so when the LineEdit is told on this thing happening, it knows send a signal, and that signal will be connected, beep, 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 to a specific node. So we're going to connect a signal from LineEdit to label. It's very much like having a mobile phone and just sending a text message. Now the key here is LineEdit doesn't care what happens once that signal is sent. It doesn't care what the label does with it. All it's going to do is say, I've got some text in me, here's your message. And the label node, our display text, doesn't care why the LineEdit is sending that message. It just cares that it's there. So every node is just responsible for what it does. Okay, so how can we make that work? We have all these signals here, and I can look at them in the documentation. So we could go over to scripts and search the help and type in the node type, which in this case is a LineEdit. Or if you wanted to, we could right-click on LineEdit and go to Open Documentation. But as we scroll down, we've got the methods it has, we've got the themes, and we have the signals, right? It lists the signals it can do. So we have a signal on text change. That's every time any of the text values have been changed within that node. So if I press backspace or press space or P or whatever else, send the signal. And we have another one when enter is pressed. So that's the one I want. I want text entered. Okay, so I'm going to connect it. Where am I going to connect it? I have to connect it to a place that has a script. If I try and connect it directly to display text, it won't work. Well, I can put a script on display text, but I don't really want to. I want all of this scene to run on one script. It's a much cleaner way of doing things, much easier to see what's going on and debug. So instead, back on this player text node, I click on the node button, go text entered, and connect it to LineEdit. And it's going to create a new method, a new function, on player text entered. And when I connect it, you'll see here, it's added a new argument. The thing in brackets that is empty over here, this is when this function is called, you're going to have extra information. This extra information is a variable that you're going to call new text, and that new text variable only exists here. If I try and say new text equals empty string, Godot will very quickly tell me, whoa, what's this variable? You haven't declared that. But if I use Alt and down arrow and put it here, that's fine. We've defined that. Okay, so this is a new variable defined here. What is the value of new text? Well, the signal is going to tell us that when we press enter. So it's a really cool way of doing this. Okay, so when this text is entered, we need to do something. And here is my challenge for you. I'd like you to have the display text node show whatever I've typed in there. So we've got a text box node, which I'm calling player text. When I type something in and press enter or return, I want the display text node to repeat whatever I've just said to it. So pause the video, give that a shot, and when you come back, I'll show you my solution. And welcome back. All right. So this starts off as pretty simple. In fact, we can just use this. So I'm going to duplicate this line. I'm going to highlight it and press Control B and then Alt down arrow, nice and fast. And I don't want story modulated by prompts, which isn't defined in this function, so it doesn't like it. I want new text. And you know what? We don't need this pass because that makes no sense. Do something now, don't do anything. So when I press play, I can type in a word and it works. Couple of things though. The first, we haven't removed this text. Okay, so what I'd like to do is find a way of emptying that. So what I can do is I can find my player text node and I can use this clear function. What does clear do? Clear is exactly the way as saying text equals empty string. Okay, so I'm just going to do a clear function. Why am I using a function? Because when I'm rereading it, I'm not seeing extra variables and values being put in. I can just look at this and say, oh, this is just a clear function. Don't even bother with it. So when I bring up my game, and you know what, let's make it full screen. Let's make it small. Let's play around with it. Great. This is a lovely way to type. Oh, what a beautiful morning. I like my coffee black, just like my metal. Awesome. Every time I press return, it'll work. Now later on, we're going to add a little button here as well, so player has a different option, and we're going to find ways of plugging this into our actual code. But look at this. We've got a fundamental thing we can do. One more thing I want to do before we wrap this up. I want to refactor this code a little bit. If I press play again, I don't know why I closed that. In the next video, maybe the one after that, I'm not quite sure yet, I want to put a little button here. Why? Because some people automatically press enter when they're typing, and some people look for a button to press like it's a form. And I want to make this as easy as possible for the player to play by giving them the obvious options that they would expect, right? You always want to make a game easy for a player to play. You always want to meet their expectations of how the game will behave. You can surprise them with fun mechanics, but they shouldn't be surprised by the user interface, the graphic user interface, the GUI, not behaving the way they think it should. So if I'm putting a button here, it's going to have its own signal, and I don't really want to repeat code. So instead, I'm going to put in a brand new function. And you know what? Let's put an extra line in here. I like to put 2 lines between functions, and this one could probably go here. And I'm going to remove that comment. Let's just tidy our code a bit. Awesome. So 2 lines. I'm going to call this update display text. That's not how I should be writing that. That should be update display text. Great. Why does this matter? Well, I'm referring to a node here. So when I'm reading this in 6 months or 3 years, when someone else reads it, they should take a look at this function and from the name of the function, understand what it does. This is a key concept. Every function should do a single thing, and that thing should be obvious from the name. Naming things in programming is one of the most difficult things to get right. This updates the display text. Now, what I want to do is, instead of saying go to the display text, update the text, and then clear this, I'm going to move all of that down. So let's press Alt and move that down here. And now I can call update display text. There it is. However, there's a bug. There's an error happening here, right? Line 14. Here's line 14. The identifier variable new text is not declared in the current scope. What does that mean? Well, I've got this variable here called new text. Now that's defined in this function, but it's not defined in this function. So what I need to do is I need to define it. Now I could go variable new text. I'm going to get the node, so I use the dollar shortcut and go vbox container player text dot text. Well, I can do that, but instead, let's do this. Let's pass the argument in. Now I'm passing this argument in, and it's saying I'm not expecting an argument. I can put the same argument in here. And probably type it correctly. There we go. And now this will work exactly the same way. Awesome. So I'm doing this because it's going to make this much cleaner and much easier to use when I start having various functions that all have to update the display text. And there's another secret we could do. We don't have to call this new text. We can call this words. And this took me a little while to get used to when I first started using Godot. If I press play now, it will still work. Why does this still work? Well, GDScript is based on Python. And when we pass arguments through, which is what these little things within functions are called, it doesn't actually matter what they're called. It matters what position they're in. Let me demonstrate that again. Here, I'm calling a function with an argument. I can call in several arguments. So I could call this one colors. I could call this one numbers, etc. I don't have those defined, but I could call them, right? And then over here, it doesn't matter what I've called them in that function because these are being created from scratch. All that matters is what is the value of this variable. What is it actually called? So I can call this one new text and I can call it words here. What matters is the position that they're in, not what I've called them previously. And that is a great place to end this video. In this video, we've seen how to use a LineEdit node. We've had a quick introduction to signals, which is going to be incredibly useful for every game we make in Godot. It's one of the core concepts in Godot. And we've looked at how to call a function with an additional argument, one that we've defined ourselves. So excellent work, and I will see you in the next video.